The war in Afghanistan is officially over, but the impact of America's longest war may impact our soldiers for many more years to come. We're talking about it with Army veteran and author of the new book, Surviving Son. Scott DeLuzio also lost a brother serving in Afghanistan. Scott, let me begin by saying, of course, we are very sorry for your loss. Clearly a source of inspiration for your book.
It certainly is, and thanks for having me on the show today. My brother and I both were raised in a very patriotic family. We both joined after 9/11, answering our country's call to service, and we were both deployed to Afghanistan in 2010, where my brother Stephen was tragically killed. But I used that as fuel to lead me to write this book, Surviving Son, and start my podcast, the Drive On podcast, where both are geared towards helping out veterans and raise awareness for the issues that many veterans are going through.
Can you talk a little bit, if you would, Scott, about the complexities of a loss like this one? There's loss as a soldier, of course, when you said goodbye to your brother, but also, you know, as a family member, but then as a soldier too, right? It kind of tugs at you in different ways because the loss of your brother also represents the loss of so many families.
It does, and there's so many families out there who suffered a similar loss to us, and they're the Gold Star families that are out there. They're grieving the same way that we are. But for me, it was especially difficult, and I write about this in the book Surviving Son, because not only was my brother killed in combat, but I was also in combat at the same time. About 20 minutes after learning of his death, I was thrown into combat as well, and so I had to set my grief aside and jump back into Army mode and do the job that I had to do over there to keep myself and my guys on my team safe.
You did whatever you had to do in that moment to probably compartmentalize and try and move forward, as you, of course, are forcing yourself not to deal with one of the deepest losses a man could ever endure. I wanted to ask you, so many other soldiers going through that too, and then you come home. That transition must be an incredible one for veterans along the way, and I know you have lived it firsthand, dealing not just with the transition, but the loss too. Can you tell us about that time?
Yeah, and so my transition was incredibly difficult because I was literally plucked off the battlefield after that firefight that I was just talking about, and I was home within a matter of days after that, and so I had very little time to decompress and unwind, and I was still in that state of hypervigilance and constantly on alert. And I talk about this in the book Surviving Son as well, and so it's one of those things that was really hard for me to deal with, and then learning how to pick back up that grief and dealing with that, and it was just a very tremendously difficult thing for me to do, and so I had to learn the hard way that there are healthy ways of dealing with this, and I talk about that in the book and also on my podcast, the Drive On podcast, where we talk to other veterans and other people who help veterans understand that there are healthy ways to deal with PTSD and the stresses of combat that they have to deal with.
There are great resources, and we have talked about them during this time of the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, but those images are ones that traumatized the world as we watch them. I want to know how it was affecting you, and then, of course, you know, other veterans too who were in contact with you about this time. It's so raw still.
It is, and I hear a lot of people saying that, you know, there were lives that were lost and it was all for nothing and things along those lines, but I like to look at the positive sides and think of some of the good things that we've done over there in Afghanistan, and I really don't feel that the lives, including my brother's life, was lost for nothing. It wasn't lost in vain. A lot of good was done by taking the fight to the enemy and preventing another 9/11 style attack from happening on American soil. So in doing so, we saved countless American lives by preventing those types of attacks. And we also saved many Afghan lives as well by making it so that they didn't have to live under the oppressive Taliban regime. And we also provided them with a little bit of freedom and provided them with schools and infrastructure that they usually would not have had under the Taliban. And so I talk about a lot of this kind of stuff in the book Surviving Son, and also on my podcast as well.
So important to highlight that message of hope that gets missed as we're all looking at the headlines and those difficult images. Very quickly, before we say goodbye, I did want to ask you, what can the rest of us, the other American citizens who are not involved in the military directly, what can we do too to help the lift during this tough time for veterans?
Yeah, I think a great thing for any American to do is to learn about what veterans deal with on a daily basis, which I talk about in the book Surviving Son, which you can get on Amazon in both paperback and Kindle formats, but also talk about to other veterans on my podcast, the Drive On Podcast, which you can subscribe to anywhere that you listen to podcasts, or go to driveonpodcast.com.
Scott DeLuzio, the book is Surviving Son. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. You'll find more information on social media and at survivingsonbook.com. Thank you, Scott.